All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Dan from Washington. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Brian.
So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this Bigfoot thing. I know you're here to share your encounter, but was Bigfoot something that was on your radar before you had an experience? Was it something that you were familiar with? And if so, what got you interested in the subject to begin with?
I don't think I was much more familiar than anybody else. I mean, as a little kid, I was into dinosaurs, sharks, and crypto creatures. But as an adult, it was, especially Sasquatch, it was one of those things like, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. And yeah, maybe there's some remnants left over of something but no, it was nothing I ever imagined. I had heard a few podcasts before that whole encounter, but I never took it really that seriously, no.
Well, let's get right into your encounter. Let's take the audience and move back to where you were, what you were doing, and tell us what happened to you.
Yeah, so this was October 2021. I grew up in Idaho. I go back for elk and deer season. Typically, my dad and I are in the central part of the state, in the wilderness area there that takes up a big portion of the state. Since I'm a non-resident now, it's hard to get tags. If you're not in on that initial draw, you just, they sell out so quickly for non-residents. So the only tag left was, for me as a non-resident, was up in the panhandle of, North Idaho. It was a little bit closer to me in Washington State anyway. So got our tags. My dad went up, about 4 or 5 days early, I think, to scout around, since it was a little bit unfamiliar territory. Turns out he had been on a fire or been on a wildland fire up there years ago. So he kind of knew it a little bit enough. So he went up there. We met up. I got off work on I think a Friday, and had all my gear ready and just hammered on over there and met him at the base of the mountains. And it was funny. I hadn't been up in that area, and my dad drove down out of the mountains, and we met up, and I got out of my truck. He got out of his truck, and I looked up at these mountains surrounding us, and my eyes got big, and I looked at him and didn't even need to say anything. And he just goes, "Yep." My comment was, "This is going to be bad, isn't it?" I mean, we're used to some really brutal terrain there in the wilderness, very high elevations. It's not uncommon to have our base camp at over 8,000 foot. But boy, these they're pretty intimidating, just straight up and down, heavy timber. I'm not used to that. Just solid timber. So we got situated, and I started tailing him on the drive up. And it was about, to put in perspective, if people haven't been out in these remote national forests or wilderness areas, I mean, we drove for 2.5 hours straight just up this mountain just to get up on a ridge top. Slow going, switchbacks. You've got to stop and try and pull over if anybody's coming the opposite direction. Eventually got up on a ridge and just started moving around, looking for, honestly, just a spot to set up a base camp. There was not many flat spots. And once we got to the top, we encountered a few hunters, and they had already nabbed pretty much any spot a pickup truck can pull off into, and you could maybe set up a tent, was taken. So we spent more time just driving and looking. Eventually we headed off in a direction, I think it was west, where some other hunters that go up there every year said, yeah, a lot of people don't go out in this direction. It's pretty rough terrain. We've never hunted that mountainside. It's just too nasty. So, maybe you'll get lucky. There's a flat spot they had mentioned. So we took off on that direction, found the spot. One thing they had mentioned was there's a downed tree that's full of bees or hornets that's blocking the entryway to this spot, and yeah, sure enough, there was. We drug it out and managed not to get stung, and parked our two. We both got 3/4 ton pickups. So it was just ideal to back in 2 trucks and set up our wall tent that we'd be staying in for the next 2 weeks or so. Got that situated. Quickly found out that we're on the spine of this ridge, and it's essentially just wide enough for that single lane dirt road to traverse, and it terminated, I want to say, about 100 yards west of our camp, and that was the end of the road. I had walked out there later, and there was just this massive, I guess, granite. I don't even want to call it a rock slide, because it stretched from the top of this mountain down, these slabs of granite the size of cars that just went down like a rock slide, and there was no going across that on foot. And that was kind of nice, because we knew there wasn't going to be anybody else coming up there and setting up camp, because there was literally no other spot that was wide enough or flat enough to go on. So got base camp all situated, and this was a day or so before opening day. There were some hunting parties, mainly families with kids, and they're driving around on their side-by-sides or four-wheelers, just having fun. It's, for a lot of us, this is the vacation for the year, is going out and hunting. I don't really take any time off from work other than these hunting trips. I usually set aside 2 to 3 weeks that I'm gone, and so everybody's happy, having a good time. And anybody that's in hunting culture, you stop and chat with people like that, and it's just a good time. And what's interesting, though, immediately people started asking, "So you guys are camping here, huh?" And we're like, "Yeah." And this plays out over the next day. My dad and I both had gone out opposite directions at one point to scout, and both of us had separately encountered a couple hunting parties, and they all asked the same question: "Is those your 2 big pickup trucks over there, on that pullout?" And we said, "Yeah." "And you're camping there, huh?" We said, "Yeah." And every single person, this is funny, because my dad commented when we met back at base camp, even though we had talked to these people separately, and different people to boot, they all said, "Well, you got the place to yourself. No one hunts up here. No one goes down this side of the mountain." And they were referring to it would have been the south side of that mountain, because the north side was just a sheer drop off, just basically a ravine. There was no traversing it. There's not even, if you're a professional climber and had equipment, sure, you could go up and down that. But the south side was still steep, but you can navigate it. But I probably talked to three or four different hunters, some that were locals and had been going up there most of their life, and they said, "Yeah, you got the place to yourself. No one goes down there." And I had looked at the terrain. I'm like, well, I can guess why. You get an elk down there, and it's a hard haul getting that animal back up. But for us, we're used to being out in wilderness areas, and the less people, the better. We're used to hitting the end of the road, and then that's it. You're on foot or horseback. So we got to opening day. Did not start off very well. It snowed that night, and then we had got up at 4 a.m, ate breakfast, and we're prepping to leave before it dawn, and sleet started coming down, and that didn't let up till 6 o'clock that night, when it started snowing again. So it was a pretty rough day. Even though it's heavily timbered, you couldn't take shelter anywhere. You stood under a tree, you got wet from the water dripping down. You stepped behind a tree, same thing. You stepped out from a tree, and that sleet and wind was coming up the slope right into your face. So I just spent most of the day just hiking, crisscrossing this mountainside. Thankfully had good gear on, so I stayed warm, and had to periodically, dump the water out of the end of my rifle barrel, and nothing. We got back, had dinner, went to bed. Next morning, same thing, a lot of snow. Well, not a lot, but it was first week of October, so a couple inches, and kind of the same deal. We just pick different directions. My dad and I separate. We don't hunt together as a team, and had the same experience. Rough country, brutal weather. I think the temperature, I mean, maybe got up into the mid 30s, maybe. Didn't see anything. I didn't run across any track of anything. Deer, elk, nothing. No game trails. And then day 3 rolls around. Same routine, up early, breakfast, hitting the ridge line at, before the sun was really up, just light enough to see. And ended up being a clear day, sunny blue sky. Still really cold though. I mean, I don't think it got above freezing that day because we were pretty high up. I had gone to the west, my dad to the east, and I had hiked up along the ridge west towards where that huge granite, I guess I can call it a slide, but it was ridiculous. It stretched out so far I couldn't even see across it, and I got up to it a couple times just to look out across it and kind of down, and it just kept going down this mountain as far as the eye could see. It was just so impressive to be standing by these granite blocks that were, I mean, some of them almost the size of a pickup truck. And that was pretty much the terminating point going west. Any direction, any upslope, downslope didn't matter. So I decided to go down and just follow it and just see what's further down slope. I had made it fairly far down the first day when there was all that sleet, but visibility was so horrible and the timber so close, it didn't matter anyways. All I could tell was, I hiked that mountain all day and I probably didn't even get a quarter of the way down it. And it just gets to that point where you decide, if I do get an animal down here, is it worth, hauling that thing on your back in quarters up and down? And I eventually wound my way back up to that road that led back to camp, and just decided, I'll swing back by camp, just eat lunch instead of just trail mix out of my bag. Did that, and it was about noon. And from there decided to jump back down that south slope because I knew my dad was to the east. And just literally just barreled off the side of the mountain from camp and kept winding my way down. I was being mindful of the time though. I'm like, okay, it's afternoon literally now. And if I get too far down, I'm going to be going up this mountain in the dark. Not that that's necessarily a problem. There is grizzly up there in that area of Idaho. Not that they would typically come up that high, but still not, the most fun scenario, hiking up in the dark with predators around. Started heading down, and at one point I got through the heavy timber, and same thing, no game trails. That's what was really interesting. Not even deer. I mean, I wasn't cutting any sign for anything. I thought I'd at least see maybe a few deer. I'd run into a couple mule deer the day before, but just real briefly, I didn't have a deer tag. So I keep heading down. It's nice and sunny, and it's still, I mean, no wind, which was really nice to have clear blue skies and no wind. That's a rare day in that time of year in that country. And I came through a tree line, and all of a sudden I saw flat grassy area, and I was like, holy cow, this is the first flat patch of land I've seen, and this is the third day other than the parking area for our trucks. And just got that thought, hey, this is where animals would be coming to graze. So started winding my way down and got to one, I wouldn't call it a meadow, just a flat little clearing with grass, and for the first time started seeing some sign. It was old scat, but still promising versus nothing. And when I looked down slope, there was enough of an opening in the trees to see that this kind of continued down slope. So you had a flat little grassy area, a slope, another flat grassy area, and then down below it, I estimated it was about 250, 300 meters down slope. It looked like a much longer, more open clearing. I still wouldn't quite call it a meadow, but fairly close. So I start working my way down just to get more visibility on that area to see if there's any movement. And, I'm always moving pretty cautiously and quietly. I'm fully camoed. I mean, even my face is covered. The only thing you can see is my eyes, really. Even my rifle, I did a custom camo job on it. I was carrying my AR-10 that I built, as in I assembled it and picked all the parts out. And that was kind of the first run. So I was pretty, camouflaged. And as I made my way past this first little flat spot, I actually ran into a game trail, and it ran mostly east-west, just along the side, angling back up to the north and to the east, where I knew my dad, he had gone that direction. And I stopped, and I'm looking down at these grassy areas, and I'm like, boy, I should keep going, but it's, time's going to start moving quickly, and I'm going to be down here and have to make my way back up. And, maybe I could come back first thing in the morning and scout this area better, get out at first light and make a little bit more ground. And I'm looking at this game trail, looking back at this grassy area, just standing there, trying to make that decision. And mentally I said, okay, you know what? I'll come back tomorrow. This is just directly south of camp. I'll follow this game trail. It leads me eventually back up to the ridge line, so I can make my way back to camp when when it gets dark, and be a little bit easier trip back. And I turn to head up that game trail, and from down below, south, I hear three very distinct, I guess you can call them knocks. I heard that term after the fact, but just wood on wood, this deep spaced, I counted 5. And if I told someone, if I was drawing if this was a comic book, I would write the sound out as THOK, like a thunk. It wasn't like a crisp light sound. It was a deep wood on wood thunk, and there was 5 of them. And I stopped, and I'm out there by myself, and I made this joke in my head. I go, what the hell is someone doing beating on a tree all the way out here? Because after that initial day before opening day, or 2 days before, no one came back up that road. I mean, we were at the terminal part of that road one way in, one way out. There was nobody else. It had snowed, no tracks in. And I'm like, no, there's no one down there. What would they be doing down this slope? I mean, it's horrible weather. It drops down to the teens at night. And it was just a kind of a joke I made in my head. What is someone doing out here beating on a tree? And I was like, no, there's no one down here. That's ridiculous. And I was like, nah, okay. But still, I was like, that's really odd. And I'm just standing there looking down in the direction, and it came, I could tell roughly from that bottom larger grassy area, somewhere down there. I was like, okay, well, that's odd. Well, whatever. I just got to move on. It's now about 1:00 in the afternoon. And I was like, all right, well, I had stood there for maybe 5 minutes, a little bit more, just looking and listening, going, what is this? And just wrote it off. I don't know, whatever, I got to go. And so I turned to leave, and I started up the game trail, and then I hear two more, same sound, but just two, thok, thok, same direction, same exact location. And now I'm like, okay, this is a little odd. Look at my watch again. Okay, you know what? I don't know what this sound is, but I haven't seen any elk, and I'm kind of getting bored. So let's go down slope and see what the heck, if I can see anything, because this is a little weird. Because I knew that mountain, there was no roads below us, and the mountain that was on south of us was just, I mean, it was like that north face of the ridge we were on. It was just straight up and down, just shale and scrub. And no one would be on that side either. There's no trails in, no roads down that go that direction. They're just on the ridge tops. That's just all wilderness behind us. And I'm like, well, okay, let's go see. And so I kind of go into stock mode, walking slowly, checking my foot placement. Because in my mind, it's like, okay, what is doing this? I don't know what animal can make this, but let's go see. So I go down that first little, like I said, it's kind of like a flat area. I get down to another grassy area, and I'm being real slow and quiet, and I'm listening, and I don't hear anything. There's no more sounds, and I'm moving at a snail's pace, and I'm like, okay, I can't see anything. There's enough trees in the way that I can't get a good advantage on that grassy area. I can see one end, then as I move, a tree gets in the way, and so I stop and I'm listening, and I see some more elk scat. So I'm like, oh, well, this is kind of cool. But I stop again, that's hunting. You do a lot of stop, look, and listen. I can stand there for 20 minutes without moving and just listen. And I did that again. I'm looking at the trees. There's no wind blowing. It's just still and crisp and clear. No more sounds. And once again, I'm like, okay, it's time. I don't know what this is, but time to turn around. And then thok, just a single knock. And at this point, I'm like, okay, what could be making this sound? This isn't a woodpecker. I mean, anybody that would try and say that's a woodpecker, I mean, this is a deep, thick, reverberating wood on wood noise. And okay, like, this is getting a little odd. And I'm literally trying to rack through my brain. Like I told you in the beginning, Sasquatch, I've spent so much time out in these areas deep in the wilderness for prolonged periods. It just, I don't know, it wouldn't enter my mind to think something's doing this, picking up a piece of wood and beating on a tree. And I'm going, okay, well, a bear's not going to be doing this. What's it going to do? Pick up a branch in its mouth and beat on a tree? And no, I mean, I'm kind of joking to myself, what animal up here could be doing this? And there's that thought in my mind, there's a person down here doing something, but where did they come from and how did they get there? I mean, they would have had to hike severe terrain to get to this mid slope of this mountain, and what are they doing? That and at this point it was down far enough, like I said, starting off, I hadn't moved very far, 250, 300 meters, and I'm like, I don't think if this was a person trying to, like, say it's a person trying to prank me, could they really see me that camouflaged and with all the trees in between where I'm just getting periodic glimpses? I'm like, they would have had to have hiked in with some hardcore gear and camped. And what are they doing? Waiting for the random hunter? It'd be like winning the lottery to run into a hunter and then prank them. I'm just running all these things through my brain. And I'm like, okay, well, let's keep going. Let's see if I can get better visibility and see if what's down there making this noise. So I keep going, make it past that first grassy flat area down to another slope. And I'm pausing periodically. I'm walking slow. I'm making sure I'm not crunching through the old snow, stepping on branches. I'm being very quiet and I'm not hearing anything. There's no continuous knocks or wood sounds. I stop again and I'm like, okay, I was a wildland firefighter for a while, paying my way through college, and, you're used to seeing some pretty crazy stuff out there in the woods, trees being broken or snapping and blown down. And so I'm looking at the treetops, kind of gauging wind speed, and it's pretty much dead still. Occasionally a small gust would move through, just enough to stir the tops of the trees. So you would estimate that at probably no more than 10-mile-an-hour wind, but just very brief, just enough to barely wiggle the tops, not enough to even really stir up the grass. So it could have been less, 5 to 10-mile-an-hour little gust here and there. No movement of the trees that's really appreciable. So I'm like, okay, this isn't, a tree blowing in the wind that's creaking or hitting against another one. It's just, I can see all the treetops down below me and they're not moving either. So, okay, I don't think that's it. And I'm stopping there, looking and listening and watching the trees and the branches and gauging wind speed. And then another knock comes, bonk, same direction. Okay, so counting the first 5, this is number 3. Or no, the 5, the 2, the 1, the 1. So I guess it's into more like 4. And okay, I'm still like, what is going on? What is doing this? This doesn't, but I'm curious, really curious now. And like I said, didn't see any elk, so may as well, if there's something weird out here, interesting, I may as well just go explore. And so I head down the next slope, going into the second grassy area, and it's the same thing. It's still, other than a real mild, gentle breeze here and there. I'm stopping, I'm looking, I'm listening. It's dead quiet. Nothing. I'm standing there. Every time I paused, it was over 5 minutes, between 5 and 10, and then another knock comes, and now I'm much closer. So I'm really getting, okay, this is coming from the end of that larger clearing. I'm now 90% sure it's coming from somewhere down there at the end of that clearing behind these trees. And so, okay, rinse and repeat. Now I'm getting closer. I'm probably now, I guess I've moved farther with the drops. I've moved a little bit further on the ground, and maybe 100 yards out, 100 meters. And I've got a good view now, or decent view of this clearing and the trees I think the sound is coming from. And the way this clearing happened, it's bordered on both sides by trees. And at the end where I think this sound is coming from, there's a lot of young pine, kind of a mixture of blue spruce, other pine, that were kind of formed a wall at the end of this grassy area. And that's where I think the sound is coming from. So I stop and I'm like, okay, I've got one more step, if you want to call it that, and then I'm level with this clearing. So I'm like, okay, well, let's proceed downwards. And I move down, and now I'm on flatter ground facing this clearing. And off to my right, it must have been, I don't know, from snow melt. It looked almost like a little gully, kind of a U shape, like a half pipe you'd skateboard in, off to my right. And I'm following that. It starts off pretty deep and then tapers closer. So I'm just going to parallel that. That's my plan. There's a few trees in the way. So at this point, I'm still figuring, I don't know how an animal would be doing this, but let's proceed like I'm stalking it. Let's move quiet. Let's move deliberately. Keep some trees in my, in front of me. I know roughly where I think this sound is coming from. So let's just, whatever. Let's just be quiet. So I'm moving. Once again, the reason I say that I'm moving so quietly is I never heard a knock while I was walking. It was only when I had stopped and waited for, that 5 to 10 minute period. And then I would hear a knock, it'd catch my interest, and I would keep moving. No sounds came while I was moving forward. And that kind of plays in, I'll tell you after, how my impression of what was going on after the fact. So I'm level with that grassy area. I'm getting closer. I'm nearing the point where this little half pipe, this little drainage tapers, and I still had to move through. It's about a 3-foot drop. So like a little half pipe that I have to go up, down and up through. And then I'm level with, I'm on that grassy area with one large pine tree in front of me. And I'm not hearing anything, and I stop and mentally go, okay, when you move down through this little eroded area and up, now you're going to be visible. So whatever's back there, you no longer have cover. So whatever it is, it's going to, if it didn't see you before, it's going to now. Because I'm still thinking I'm the one, sneaking up on whatever this is. And so I'm like, all right, well, let's keep this going. And right before I start to move down into that little dip, the only way I can describe this is, like, I call it machine gun knocks. It was 5 knocks again, but they were so fast, the same deep, heavy sound, but like the only way I tried replicating it myself, I can't do it with a piece of wood, but is slamming your fist into your palm as fast as you can 5 times, really close. It was so rapid and loud. I just kind of started, and I'm like, whoa, okay, what the hell is this? Like that and for the first time, I stopped, and I'm like, okay, it's right in front of me. It's definitely behind those trees, because there is no questioning this. At this point, I'm at 50 yards and in. And just the hair kind of stood up on my neck, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I don't know what that just was, but it's right back there behind those trees. And of course, I'm sure anybody listening that's like, yeah, that was kind of a warning or something. but I didn't have any of that mindset that there's anything other than like an animal doing something that I can't explain, but weird back there. And so I'm like, okay, well, it's back there. So you've come this far. Let's see what we can see. And just kept my rifle at the low ready. I wasn't going to point at anything. And I go down through that little dip in the ground, and now that big tree is just right in front of me. I'm not behind it, but I've still got a little bit of cover. And I'm like, okay, this is it. You step out, and now you're looking at, I'm maybe at 30 yards, 30 meters, and a couple more steps, and I'm close. And I'm just staring at these trees. At this point, almost praying I can see something, because I'm like, okay, if this is an aggressive, at this point, I don't know what it is, but I'm like, if this is something aggressive, I'm going to be within 25 yards. And that is pretty darn close, even for a human, if they're going to charge you. Anybody that's done like any type of close quarters combat training, I've done that with pistols and rifles, that distance, a person can close on you very, very quickly. Never mind like a bear, a grizzly that can run 40 miles an hour or whatever. It's a quick sprint. So I just snugged my rifle up, kept it at the low ready, and I'm like, okay, here we go. Went through that dip and came up and paused again. And I'm just staring at these trees like, just please show yourself. Whatever is back there, just give me some movement, just a flash of movement. Because I'm like, now I'm like invested in, I want to see what's doing this, but I'm like, I'm going to be in this opening, in this meadow, no cover, which wouldn't matter with an animal. I guess if it was a human wanting to ambush me, I don't know, but. And I stop, and I'm just like, come on, please. And these trees were so overlapping, you couldn't see behind them. It wasn't just like a tree here. There was just these overlapping young pines. And so I stop again, and I'm just staring, just like, come on, please. And the next thing is, this is another sound I can't easily describe. The only way I can even come close is like having a grenade go off in front of you. It was the most, the sound, whatever it was using, whether it was holding a tree, like a full grown, like a 6-inch diameter green tree, or I don't know, but it teed off on something so violently that, I mean, this was like a bomb going off, just wood on wood. Just, it stunned me, literally stunned me. I staggered back, just stumbled back in just complete shock, because this was just right there in front of me behind these trees. And it was so, I mean, just the force of it, it shocked me. I mean, like nothing else I've ever, I mean, I've seen cars crash right in front of me, and the effect wasn't even close to this. It just stunned me. Yeah, I staggered back, and I'm sure my eyes were the size of dinner plates. Here's the part. So I think I mentioned in my email to you, and if I didn't, I apologize. I told this story once to another, I guess, researcher shortly after this happened, because I struggled so much with, but anyways, I'll just tell you how I told him, and I told my wife for a year. I didn't tell them what I saw, either one of them, even my wife, until a year later. What I told people was there was that horrible, just violent smash, like a bomb. And then I described it like a film reel, an old fashioned film reel being cut out of my life, because it went from horrible smash, me staggering back in shock, and then like my brain was rebooted. And now I cut it a diagonal into the middle of that clearing, and I'm backing away with my rifle shouldered. I have a 1 to 10 power LPVO, low power variable optic, on that rifle, and I kept it at 1 power, so it's almost like a red dot. When you can just put it up, both eyes open, close quarters, you can shoot. And I'm backing out of that meadow with that gun up. And there's two things going through my brain at that point. Don't run. Don't run. And of course, the other part of my brain going, run like hell, run like hell. And then this other little voice. And I told this on this interview, which is on YouTube. The other thought in my brain is, this gun's not going to be enough. Which is funny, because I said that and I didn't explain why I thought this gun wouldn't be enough. And it's an AR-10. I had a 10 round mag of 308, had Barnes solid copper hollow points, deep penetrating. That's not the biggest rifle, but decent. It's definitely decent enough to take a elk, moose, black bear. I mean, I would even, if I had to take a grizzly close in, I mean, I would do it. But reversing back, when that smash came and I staggered back, that part, oh man, I haven't told this through all consecutively, even to my wife. I told her what I saw finally. I don't know if it was crouched or just behind these trees. There were various heights. A lot of them were probably around 8 foot, like a standard ceiling. When I staggered back, just in shock, I mean, I took my eyes off. I was just stunned. And I look back up, and it's standing right there behind these trees, staring at me. And it shut me down, my brain down so bad. I went through some pretty intense therapy before I kind of got over this. I suppressed that 2 seconds. It was probably 1001, 1002. I got this straight on visual that I pushed that memory down with prejudice. And a therapist later explained, that's not an uncommon, delayed thing to be, because I thought I was fine once I told the story that first time, like a few weeks after, but I left out the worst part of it, which it was standing right there with its chest and shoulders above some of the trees. And it broke my brain. I just, and I only got this, well, you were law enforcement, right, Brian?
16 years. Yep.
So yeah, how unreliable eyewitnesses can be, but also there is that, you get these snapshots when you have that something catastrophic that just stick with you. And I got enough of a snapshot of this thing standing there. And I just had 3 impressions. Just the mass of it was, that's, I think, the worst part is just the size. I mean, like I said, I estimated a lot of these trees being 8 foot, and its chest and shoulders were above them. So I could see most of its chest, shoulders, head. And just, I looked at my truck later and I'm like, this thing's shoulders I have a 3/4 ton pickup. Its shoulders would have overlapped the hood of my truck easily and left some room for its delts on the side. And just, there was that, just this sheer, I mean, I've never I mean, I've hunted my whole life. I've had moose come out of the brush right in front of me, like 10 feet from me, and they're huge, but it's something you're used to seeing, right? A moose is a moose. This isn't something with shoulders standing there glaring at you from, I mean, I was about 25 yards away, maybe 20. And in the color, it stood out because you had these really nice green trees, and the coloration was bizarre. Just that snapshot I got. The only way I could compare it was, if you look at a pine tree, you could sometimes say they have a predominant color like brown. Some of them, as they get older, they get that grayish tint to them. That's kind of what it looked like this intermingling of colors, like darker grays and browns, not striped or anything. It's just that weird variability you see in trees. And I had someone say later, like, well, maybe you got scared because of that noise and you just looked at a tree. I'm like, okay, I've been staring at these trees, and that wasn't there before that horrible sound. And you can't mistake that outline. I mean, yeah, it's a roughly human outline with the shoulders and the head. And then I didn't obviously hang around to get a good, what color are your eyes or lips? I mean, as far as I could tell, it was kind of like staring at the Spartan helmets, how they have, the eye slits and then that strip down the middle where the cheek guards come in. That's the closest I could describe its face was, full, I guess, beard, hair all the way up to its eye sockets, and then just this black, I assume that's its skin, this black slit where its nose, and then its eye sockets were, and its eyebrows, and just that's it. I mean, just like that snapshot of this thing glaring at me over these trees, and I could not talk about it for so long, and I went through months and months of just nightmares. I'm not ashamed to say I drank too much to shove that down because I would wake up just in a panic, just random, just fight or flight panic. I guess call them panic attacks during the day. That I just something, and I mean, I'm safe at home. I'm back in a populated area, and it just. But anyways, that's when I'm not military or law enforcement. I've concealed carry my whole life, or my adult life, and I've trained a lot with, different firearms, just because that's, in my opinion, that's your responsibility to be well trained with that tool if you're going to carry it and use it. So I had done, shoot and scoot drills, moving and firing at the same time, moving. That's kind of my bot. I went to that instinctual get off the X, right? If this was a human with a gun pointed at me, I got off the X, and that's why I moved laterally into the middle. It wouldn't have mattered with this thing; it wasn't going to shoot me. And so I'm in the middle of that meadow with just backing up in a, with my knees soft enough I could back up and not trip and fall, but I wanted to keep that my reticle steady on that tree, because when I moved, it got out of my field of vision because I'd moved laterally, but I kept my rifle and my scope on where if it came at me, it would be coming out of these trees, and I'm just backing up, and man, it just, every cell in my body is saying run, run. But then that training in a lifetime of hunting, don't turn your back. If you turn your back, you're done. And I'm backing away. My heels are catching. The grass was a little bit tall, so it's catching, and I'm tripping a little bit. And I'm just thinking, if I go on my back, I've got my bag on, 35 or so pounds. If I go on my back, now I'm on my back, and it's going to see that and just take me. And so I made this split second decision. In my mind, I'm like, I have to put distance between the two of us, because if it comes at me, I have to have time to get enough rounds on it to do something, because if it charges me and it's 25, 30 yards, I am not going to, even a 308. It was just, this thing was so thick and big. I mean, I stood next to a mounted Cape Buffalo once and looked at it, and I'm like, just that massive muscle in the neck. I'm like, that's what standing in front of this thing was like. And just that rifle just felt like I may as well had a BB gun. Am I going to get enough effective rounds on it to stop it before it gets a hold of me? And so I made this decision. I said, okay, you're going to turn and you're going to sprint 3 steps, 3 lunges, and then you're going to pivot back and put that rifle back on that tree line. And I did. It was hard to do because I did not want to turn my back, but I turned, I pivoted 3 lunges back on the tree line. I'm backing up again. And I just kind of leapfrogged like that, and nothing, it didn't come out. Then I got to the base, the slope of that mountain. And at this point, I'm like, I'm just losing my mind. And I just went like the devil himself was on my tail, and I just started running up that mountain. But still, I said, okay, now double that distance and you're going to turn and pivot. Do not just run, because I'm crashing through trees and branches. I'm disregarding all safety, but do not just turn your back and run, because at this point, if it did decide to get me, now I've got some distance and I can hopefully put effective rounds. And I had a reload on my hip belt. And so I did that up this mountain, and I'm just the feeling like your heart and lungs are going to explode. I'm like, thank God I stay in shape for this stuff. And I'm just going and going straight up, and just never thought it was going to end. And then I see it looks like a flat spot in front of me, and it was the road. And I just barreled onto that road. I crashed into the embankment on the other side, pivoted on my back with my rifle between my legs, and just waited, because I'm like, if it's behind me, that head's going to come up over this edge of this road, and I'm just going to start shooting. But there's also a part of me is like, okay, if something that big was chasing you, you'd hear it. You would hear it. And I sat there and nothing. And I was just in shock. I looked down, and the stupidest thing, one of my boots was untied, and I fumble around and tie my boot, and I'm looking around, and I'm on the road. Even though I can navigate this unfamiliar terrain and not get lost, I didn't know which way to go. I just sat there staring at the road going, I don't know. I just couldn't do anything. And I look and I see a boot print from my dad from the day before, heading back to where camp was. And it was like a lifeline. I stumbled back to camp. I don't remember walking back. It was about a quarter mile. I don't remember setting my rifle down in my bag, but in my truck, I was carrying, oddly enough, not this day, I had a 454 Casull revolver strapped to my chest most of the time. And I left it off that day. I don't know why. It's a big, heavy chunk of metal. But I grabbed that. I'm sitting in the truck I'm sitting in now. I sat it on the console right by me and just lost it. I mean, it took me, I couldn't even start my truck. I was shaking so bad. I mean, I had all this cold weather gear on, and I'm just shaking so bad I can't get my keys in the ignition. I'm trying to get the heater on and just losing my mind. And the only thing that went through my brain was, you just let yourself get lured into an ambush. Like, I don't know if my brain had thought processed that as I'm stumbling back to camp and I just wasn't aware of it. But the impression I got was, you got lured into this, and you idiot, you just walked into an ambush. And I just sat there, just completely breaking down. Just the only thought was, I gotta leave. I got to get the hell out of here, and I'm never coming back to the woods again. I don't care. This was day 3 out of 14 for our hunt. And then I'm thinking, my dad's out there. My dad's, but I just sat there, lose my mind. And hours later, he comes back to camp and we eat dinner. And I was in shock, and my dad's like, see anything? And I'm like, nope. And I didn't sleep that night. Of course, I just laid in my truck. I made sure I had that rifle up in the front seat. I just slept in the cab in my extended cap. I had the pistol on my person, just lying there, just waiting. I'm like, just waiting to see some huge head come peeking into my truck, and I'm just going to start shooting. And the worst thought was, I didn't tell my dad, because if that thing's out there, he's out there by himself too. And the other thought was, what am I going to do for the next 11 days? I can't just leave and tell my dad, well, gotta go, I'm done. And so I had this idea in my mind, well, I'm going to pretend to walk off every morning. I'm going to come back and sit in my truck with my guns, and I'm going to sit there from sun up till sundown for the next 11 days. That's what I'm doing. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave my dad here, but I'm not doing it. And ended up getting up that morning, not sleeping, but getting out of the truck. Then I got mad, and I'm like, you know what? I got some extra firearms in this vehicle. I'm going to strap everything on I have, and I'm going to go back down there, because I'm not going to allow this thing to do this to me. I've hunted my whole life. That's my happy place. No, forget this. I didn't. We set off that morning, and I just stuck to a upper ridge that was fairly open, and every sound, every squirrel, every bird, I would just start. And at one point I'm walking, and there's just tears running down my face into my beard, and I'm just didn't even realize it. And I just keep hearing those sounds, and just seeing that thing just there, just looking at me, and just like, how is this possible? I mean, but anyways, we finished up most of the week. I had to go back into Washington and work for a few days. And then my dad said at the end of the hunt, I stuck it out. We ended up going to a lower location off that ridge, which was much more open. I actually felt more comfortable. It was weird, like leaving that mountain, I felt okay, and I continued to hunt. We didn't get anything, and my dad said, hey, your tag's good until next Sunday. So if, not a quick drive, but you're across the border, maybe come back on your own and finish the hunt. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And I did. I left work, drove back to those mountains, and didn't get there till 9-10 at night, and just parked and stayed there. Not where I was at, though. I stayed in that lower area. I mean, I could still see the ridge actually where we were parked from where I had parked my truck that night. In the morning, I could see. And I hunted for another 3 days by myself. I brought an even more ridiculous amount of firepower with me, which it just seems silly, right? Like, you can bring all the guns you want, but what are you going to do? That's basically it. I like I said, I went through a pretty rough stretch where it just came back with a vengeance, the memory of it. And I eventually, went through some pretty intensive therapy, and someone with some good trauma background, finally said, you know what? I want you to write this whole thing down, start to finish, in excruciating detail. Do not leave anything out. Write it down. I know you've told the story. Write it down. And I did. And I don't know why that allowed me to kind of get over that hump of, okay, yeah, that was horrible. That was something I never asked for. I don't ever want to see or encounter. I want nothing to do with this whole thing ever again. But it allowed me to get through that tough period. I, stopped having nightmares. I, quit using booze as a, to self-medicate and shut that memory out and just got it out. And I finally, one day my wife and I were taking a walk, and it was actually around Halloween, and someone had one of those huge giant skeletons in their yard that's, I don't know, 10, 12 foot tall. And I said, yeah, that's about how big that was. And she's like, what? And I said, that, whatever that was, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I said that it was that tall. And she's looked at it and she goes, okay, you've told me this whole story. You didn't tell me you started one night when I found you on the couch just breaking down. You started telling me that you saw what you saw, but then you stopped and denied it. And she's like, it was that big? I said, well, that's just an upscaled human skeleton. Yeah, it's probably 10 foot tall, but I said the bone structure, no. And her eyes she goes, oh my God. She was just shocked because she saw what I went through. She heard the story. I mean, she hates these things more than I do. I wouldn't say I have hatred for them. She hates them. She's like, yeah, I wish you would go back there and kill it. I'm like, yeah, if I've got a trained fire team with me with a lot of heavy firepower, because what that gentleman that I talked to right after said, he had encounters, he said, I don't think they were luring you in to ambush you. They were communicating with the other ones around you. I was like, what? And he said, yeah, they usually are in groups, and that's a communication thing. And they were probably letting each other know that, yeah, there's an armed human or there's a threatened area. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I agree with that. Not because, this is a one-time thing, but the way those knocks happened, they only happened when I stopped and I was like, I'm going to turn back. And I'd been standing there. They didn't happen randomly while I was walking. They only happened when I was still for a long period. And of course, just like a prey animal, I heard a sound and I'm like, oh, let's go see what that is. And then when I would stop and hesitate for a period of time, there would come another knock. That's why I think that's what my brain had processed when I got back, when I was walking back to camp, was those knocks were keeping me coming forward. It saw that I moved forward in response to that sound. And then when I didn't hear anything, I stopped. I don't know, maybe it's just sheer coincidence, but I don't know anymore. I don't care. It's just like, it happened. It's over. It really impacted my life badly for long enough that it's just kind of like, that's why I reached out to you. I started listening. I found your podcast, and I had heard you were in law enforcement. It's like, okay, you've seen some pretty traumatic stuff. You want to tell someone that's, that doesn't have quite maybe rose-colored glasses on when they're thinking of these things, like, oh, they were just out there just doing their thing and they didn't mean you any harm. And I'm like, maybe not. I think what happened was, when I got close enough, since I was so camouflaged up, including my weapon, and I had it a little ready close to my body, maybe it didn't recognize that weapon until I got that close. And when I did, which is when it did those 5 knocks, and maybe that was the warning, you need to back off. And I didn't listen because I didn't know what it was. And that last knock was clearly, you need to get the hell out of here now. And then the show itself, it was just pure intimidation. Like, you need to get out of here now. And maybe it did. Maybe it was just doing its thing. Or maybe it decided, hey, this guy's got a weapon. Maybe he's not worth it. He might hurt me, and predators don't want to get hurt. They want to make a kill and not get injured. And maybe that's what it decided. Like, all right, this ain't worth it. Get out of here now. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you, I've heard a lot of stories that involve wood knocks. And as you're telling the story, I'm taking notes and I'm writing down the wood knocks, and I'm thinking, okay, very much like you were told, in most cases, that sounds like some sort of communication. People have theories that they communicate with others and they're knocking. I've had Carter Bouchard on the show, and Carter's talked about, he believes they're counting. He's in a group of 10 people and 3 people leave and they hear 7 knocks or 3 knocks. Okay, there's 3 leave and there's 7 here. So it's all theoretical. It's all subjective, right? Because we really don't know. But
right.
Now that I've heard your story and what you're saying, as you're telling the story, I'm thinking this is odd behavior, because it's not doing it when you're walking. It's only doing it when you're stopping. And now that you say what your perception is, it sounds a lot like you may be right. And that's the first time that I've ever even considered that it may be luring you in, or maybe some of these knocks that other people hear may be a way to lure in a prey animal, which is, unfortunately, at that point was you, because that's what predators do. Predators learn how to mimic sounds, and they use other things to bring smaller prey in to ambush them. So that's a really interesting theory. I've got a quick question about when you and your dad arrived on the mountain, and all of these people are saying, oh, you're camping here and that kind of thing. In retrospect, do you think they were just saying this is a shitty area to hunt? Why nobody hunts up here because it's a shitty area? Or do you think those people really knew what was going on and they just didn't tell you what you might run into up there?
It makes me really think, because the way some of them phrased it, no one goes down there. Some said no one hunts up in this area. Other people specifically said no one goes down there on that side of that mountain. And once I got down there, I'm like, yeah, this is horrible. This is horrible terrain. The weather's horrible. It's brutal. I wonder, I've thought about that. And it's just the fact that my dad got the same responses separately from me from different hunters. It really makes me wonder. I ran into one gentleman from Washington as well. He said, I've been coming up here 30 years and I never hunt down on this side of this mountain. I didn't ask him anything further. I just assume, yeah, it sucks. But my dad and we're used to just going to these brutal, awful areas and slugging it out on foot. We never hunt. We don't road hunt. We don't hunt. We don't have 4-wheelers or side-by-sides. I mean, I've never grown up hunting like that. I mean, the biggest luxury we had growing up was our horse that we used to pack elk out from remote areas. So it was always on foot. And just that, to me, that's just part of hunting is you're going to get into some nasty, nasty territory and you're going to slug it out, because that's hunting. This isn't a shopping trip. You're out there to really get out in the wild, and that's part of the fun of it. If I still enjoy it, even if I don't get harvest an animal, it's just so amazing to be out in these remote areas where you can go weeks without seeing a sign of humanity, no roads, no people. And yeah, I do wonder. I thought maybe I should go back to some of the little towns and scoot up to a bar some night and be like, hey, you ever running anything weird up there? Yeah.
You might be surprised what people will tell you. Let me ask you this. Obviously, you didn't tell your dad during that trip. Did you eventually tell your dad what you saw? And if so, what was his reaction to it?
I did. It wasn't good. And that was kind of the end of me even touching alcohol, because we're sitting around I was back home in Idaho, and I was like, I got to tell him, and got up a little liquid courage. And I same thing. My adrenaline started going. And I think both my parents were shocked because they're just like, I had kind of told him what the sounds and stuff. And I ran into something weird. And he's like, look, you're safe. You're okay. I don't know what that was, but you're okay now, and that's it. We kind of left it at that. But he listened. He didn't go, oh yeah, whatever, because we don't, we're not drinking or doing drugs or anything up there hunting. We just don't. That's not. I know some people have this image of hunters as, dad and uncles and stuff go out and sit around the campfire getting loaded, and I'm like, not. Yeah, maybe some people do that. There's none of that going on. So yeah, that was kind of the end of it. I just told him, and I said I just apologized to him. I'm like, I'm sorry I didn't tell you, because what if it had done the same thing to you and you had walked in on it and it didn't change its mind? I said, I was pretty broken up. I felt like a coward because I'm just like, I should have, good Lord, just out of concern for my dad. But I just couldn't process what happened. I was in such shock for days, just kind of walking around, just not being able to understand it. I just didn't know how to tell him. He's got a multiple master's degree in science and very logical man. And I didn't think he would ridicule me. I just was like, how do I explain this to someone? Especially after spending so much time in these remote areas and never seeing anything like this, or even remotely like this. Like, just one day, boom, there it is. It's like, some people would think it's like winning the lottery. I'm like, no, I wish this never happened. I truly wish that this was something that never came into my life, because it really had a bad impact on me for a long time. And how do you deal with that, with going to a therapist and saying you saw something like that and what it did to you? And then there's people that are like spending all their time wanting to see, or thinking they want to see something like this. And I'm like, no, you don't. Not in that way. If I was 500 yards out and it was on the other end of my rifle, with a scope, okay, maybe I could tolerate that a little better, but not like this. Not going in having no thought in my mind. I made the mistake of reading some YouTube comments after I did that first interview, and people like, well, yeah, what do you think it was? And I'm like, that's the problem. I didn't have that in my brain, because that's not something that's in reality for me, or it wasn't. So I didn't go, oh man, this might be a Sasquatch. Yeah.
Well, typically those sightings do one of two things, and I certainly see the answer on the wall for you. It does drive some people to want to know more and get out and try to recreate their experience, and they go down the rabbit hole of researching and trying to figure out where these things are, what they are. Did you have any of that at all for yourself after that happened, and maybe even more recently, once you've sort of moved past the initial trauma and shock and all the things that you went through? Have you done any research? Do you get into that at all, or is it something that you just want to completely forget about and move on from?
As I've listened to all of your podcasts, I've listened to all of the Sasquatch Chronicles with Wes, and that's the extent of it. I guess it's more of like therapy, like people that have trauma groups, and you hear, or grief groups, or people that have had children that have died, and just hearing other people say these things and know that they're now, especially, it's like they're not lying. They're not making this up. I know still a lot of people think that. It's like, yeah, like what am I gaining by making this up? Like, just average Joe Blow. I don't. It's and I'm serious. I don't want to forget it because now it's like, okay, let's put this spin on it. You've now had something happen to you that very, very, very few people have happen, and a lot of people think they want to happen. Let's leave it at that, okay? And not shut it out. Acknowledge it, because that shutting it out, that really messed me up. Just literally, that old stuff it down. We'll see if at the bottom of a bottle we can forget that. That I knew that. I'm in the medical field. I knew that, but it just, there was those nights, man, where I would wake up in just sheer terror, even though it happened in the daytime. That's when your brain's doing its thing, and just sheer, just terror, just, wanting to just grab a rifle and just back into a corner. And I mean, I didn't do that, thankfully. My wife wouldn't have enjoyed that, but no, I don't. It was such a short glimpse. It was the whole thing. Yes, it lasted about an hour. I don't, beyond what I listened to, I don't know. I don't want to know more about them. I certainly don't want to see one ever again. I don't think that's going to resolve anything for me personally. Other than I'm fascinated by how, what would have happened if I had shot it? Would those 308 rounds have gone through? Would they have penetrated deep enough through that mass to stop it? Or get enough vital hits on it to stop it before it killed me? Yeah, that part does fascinate me, because people describe them being just jacked, like a bodybuilder. I don't know about that. It was just, like I said, looking at a Cape buffalo, just the sheer mass is just ungodly. I can't imagine how thick its bones have to be. I listened to one of your podcasts where you were debating that with someone about how ridiculous it is to think of something. And I think my estimate of about 10 foot tall was pretty good based on the tree height and, comparing it to a ceiling. Just the ridiculous mass of that thing that it has to have in the bone structure to support all that is just obscene. That's why when I told that story and me saying, I don't know if this gun's going to be enough, we're absolutely 100% true. I mean, I've killed big game and I knew it was enough. That's a broadside shot, ideally, yes. But I don't know. I seriously don't know if those rounds would have made it deep enough to really do the job, at least not before it got me. I mean, that'd be like shooting a grizzly charging me with a 308. Yeah, it's problem, unless I get a central nervous system hit, it's probably going to get on me before it dies. Even if I get vital hits, it's going to get me and mess me up pretty bad. And the size of this thing, it wouldn't be just getting mauled. I mean, it would just be tear me in half like a piece of paper and toss me, one side on each side of that meadow and just be done. That bothered me, because that just feeling like that, going from, hey, I'm the mighty hunter, right? I've got my camouflage and my weapon, to I felt like a rabbit in front of a wolf. And I felt defenseless even with that rifle. And I mean, I technically had 20 rounds on me, but at that distance and not knowing if those rounds were going to make it through to do enough vital tissue damage to stop it before it got me, I don't think there's any way. Unless I hit it right in the head, or got lucky and took one of its legs out, and it stumbled or something. It's humbling, but just terrifying. I mean, I've run into bear, been very close to bear that I don't think had good intentions, and I didn't feel like that. I mean, it's a bear. Yeah, they're predators and they're big. They can do some damage, but it's a bear. It wasn't a bear. It, yeah, it's mind-boggling. I just can't imagine going out and looking for them. I don't
Yeah,
think it's a good idea.
I'm the same way, man. And I tell people on the show that go out, and I want to have an encounter, I want to have an experience, and I'm like, you know what? I've heard things here on the property that have scared the shit out of me, and I certainly don't want to run into whatever. I don't care if it was a Sasquatch or not. I don't want to run into that in the middle of the night, even on one of the trails. I used to do
Hmm.
night hikes around the house. I don't do that
Hmm.
anymore because of some of the things. I have no desire to come face to face with one of these things. And I think people that have not had an experience that would run into something and have an experience like you, I think they would change their mind as well. Some people have those magical moments and they have a distant off sighting and it's not one of those fight or flight kind of situations and it's a different story, but I don't think anybody and hunters that I've talked to that have been that close, I mean, they've had them walk up under their tree stands and could have jerked them
Right.
out of the tree. Yeah, it's a whole different ball of wax when you're in that kind of situation with something that big. So I can only imagine, man. Well, I'm definitely glad that you're in a better place. And I really, really appreciate you trusting me enough to come on and share your story with us because I say it all the time. It's important. Even if it's not a sighting, even if it's just a vocalization or trees rattling or whatever the case may be. I think every single encounter should be documented. And I think everybody who listens to them gets something from it, especially people like you. There's tons of people just like you who have never shared their experience with anybody and may never. But hearing your encounter may help them in some way, and that's one of the reasons that I continue to do the show is because of that. And I hear people they
Yeah.
reach out all the time and say, I heard that guy on the show. I never thought anybody had an experience like mine until I heard that. And, they may not ever share their experience, but at least they walk away with that. So I say thank you for that, man. And I've really had a blast talking to you about your encounter. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I felt, yeah, I needed to tell it all the way through with all the details at least once again before I do truly just, put it behind me.